In this video, we'll take a look at how to begin to style the content of our documents, including how to work with the Google Fonts service and how to begin to match our comps to our build out in the browser precisely. So first we need to talk about how to get the fonts we need for this exercise. So I'm actually starting to work through exercise 7 as a part of this demonstration, where we are instructed that we need to find the Merriweather, Open Sans, and XO2 fonts from the Google Fonts API. So first we're going to go to the Google Fonts API and search for those fonts. Let's start with Merriweather. If we type in Merriweather to search, we see we have two different options. And if we click on the one that matches the one we're told about in the instructions, we end up on a page like this, where we can see all the different weights and styles that we have available in this font. It's a very flexible font with lots of different options, and that's very nice. So in order to use this locally, we're going to click Download Font. Okay, that's going to allow us to install this on our systems, which on a Mac you can use the Font Book tool, and I'm sure there's a similar tool on PC to use. Once you have installed the font, you can then open up Figma and use the font. If you already had Figma open before you install the font, you may need to restart Figma. Okay, so with Figma open, you can see the fonts are applied and looking the way that we want them to look. So let's go find the other fonts as well before we dive into this project. So we're going to go back to the Google Fonts main page and look for Open Sans. There it is. And we will download that font family. And then we also need XO2. There it is. And we'll download that font family. All right, with all those fonts installed, we can now use them in our mockup and know that what we're looking at is what we actually want to look at, or what we're aiming for to style out. All right, so that allows us to work with those fonts locally, and you can do the same thing when you're starting a fresh project and searching for fonts. You can use the fonts at Google to find fonts that you like, download them, and then be able to use them in your mockup. The next step is, how do we actually use those fonts in the browser? Because just having them on your desktop computer does not guarantee that they're going to be available to all of the users of your website. Instead, we're going to make use of the Google Fonts API service to add these fonts into our project. And it's going to work something like this. We're going to want to go to the API and select the specific font weights and styles that we need, so that we only get exactly what we need for our comp, and we'll select them here. So it'd be helpful if we had a way of collecting and finding out what exactly we need from our comps first. So I'm going to switch back to Merriweather, since that's the first one we need. And there's a very nice, so you can certainly click through your example here and see what's being used. So Merriweather Bold Italic is one, and Merriweather Light. So we could come over here and say Merriweather Bold Italic and select it. And we could go and say Merriweather Light and select that. So here's Light. Okay, and you see that they're stacking up here. So you can certainly do that, but there's also a quicker way to do this provided through a plugin here in Figma. So you can go to this menu and go to Plugins, and I already have it installed, but if you do not have this Font Fascia plugin installed yet, you can go to Manage Plugins and search, browse all plugins, and search for Font Fascia, and then click to install it. Okay, so with that installed, you can run this very nice command that looks all throughout your document and collects all the different weights that are being used. So next thing you want to just think about is, are these all things that I actually need? So you can open up and click to see where this is being used and go to all the different places that it's being used. So since my first one here is just the Merriweather, it looks like Merriweather only has Merriweather Light in a couple of paragraphs here, and Merriweather Bold Italic. So we're going to just stick to those two and know that we're in good shape for that. Okay, so given that, we've got these two stacked up here. So now we need to add these into our style sheet. In this case, we are working with an embedded style sheet since we're only using it for this one page. So we're going to add our own style tags here at the top of our document that we'll be able to put styles in. And let's go ahead and move to our 4Paws page. I'm going to run a test to make sure that this is refreshing for me? It is. A trick that we found is that if you put in the name of the page that you want to view, the actual path to that page in the preview window, it sometimes sticks around a little bit better than if you don't do that. Now back in the Google Fonts API, we click this Embed tab and click on the @import link and grab specifically this bit of content in here since we already have the style tags. And when we're working in an external style sheet, we also only need this @import bit because we don't need the style tags in an external style sheet. So we're going to copy that and paste it into our style sheet here. All right, now we have those fonts available to use in our mockup. Now we need to just go about the work of rebuilding all the styles here in the browser that we've mocked up in our Figma file. And our goal is going to be to match things as close as we possibly can. Thankfully, this task is pretty straightforward in terms of selecting the elements here in the mockup and inspecting the styles that are being applied to them, and then matching those in our CSS with the comparable CSS properties. So one of the tricks that we can do that's covered in our lessons to make sure that we can match font sizes accurately, because we prefer not to use pixels or points on the web, but rather to use em or rem, what we can do is select the HTML element and set font size to 10 pixels. The default font size is 16 pixels. So by resetting this to 10, we establish a base of 10 off of which we can adjust our font sizes otherwise. Now everywhere else when we want to match the font size in our mockups, we can use a rem setting that is 1/10 of our setting in our mockup. So for example, as we look throughout this page, we might realize that most of the page is this body copy style, and that style is a 14 pixels in font size, or 14 points in font size. So we would come over here to our browser and we would say, perhaps on body, since that would apply everywhere by default, we can set font size to 1/10 of 14, which would be 1.4, and then we need the rem unit. Okay, so as we do that, you can see everything downsized, and that's okay. We also have a line height of 24, so line height 2.4 rem. Okay, and that spaced things out a little bit more. All right, next up we can use our Merriweather font as our default font, and back over here in Google Fonts, they've provided us this property that we can copy and paste to use so that we use Merriweather as our font. Okay, last of all, we can set a font weight to be the lighter weight, and you may recall that we were using the light weight, which is a weight of 300. So we're going to set 300 as the light weight. Okay, so that has effectively set up most of our document to use the right font settings. We also have a color that we could use by default on body. As I click on these elements, you can see that there are these two fonts being applied because of the blue coloring on the hyperlinks. So this darker color is the one I want. I copy it, set up the color, and then put in a pound sign and paste. Okay, because these are hex values, and when we provide hex color values in CSS, we need to start them with a pound sign. But when you copy them out of Figma, it's not going to include the pound sign right away, so you need to make sure to put that in. Okay, so you can see we've effectively set up the general settings for our colors. Now, one other thing that we can try to match is the spacing between the lines. So we already set the leading, which is the space between the lines inside of the block, but the space after the block between actual separate paragraphs here is also set up here in our styles. It's this value right here. So at least between the blocks inside of one frame like this, one element like this, we can see that that 12 pixels is the setting that we can use to space them out. But I'm going to put this on paragraphs because we don't want that spacing on body as a whole. We want it on individual paragraphs. So this is the margin bottom setting, and we're going to use 1.2 rem. Now, font size, line height, and margin bottom on type elements are about all that I use rems for. I typically use pixels for other things like widths and padding and margin on other things, and we'll talk about those in the next lesson. But suffice to say, margin bottom using rems keeps us kind of still in that flexible mindset of using rem units instead of fixed values. So now our paragraphs are set generally the same amount apart as these here. And if we zoom to 100% and then hold these two side by side, perhaps if I just slide this off to the side and position this a little bit different, we can kind of get a sense of how closely these are looking in terms of matching. This is actually a little bit harder to do with the integrated preview, so I'm going to open this preview in a new window and prefer putting this first line side by side with my type over here. All right, so if I go down to the most of the dogs like that and we hold it side by side, you can see how closely things are lining up, and it's all the better if we line up the baselines just like that. Okay, now it's okay that the word wrap is happening at different places. We're just letting this page be as wide as it needs to be. But if you can see, if we make it narrower and kind of match the width of the content elements, or width of our actual mock-up, you'll see that things will begin to wrap a little bit more the same way as well. So if we make it a little narrower still, we'll see things wrapping. Okay, and then you can see we have matched the font settings, the color, the spacing between the lines, so that is looking good. Let's go ahead and hit up the color on those hyperlinks while we're here and thinking about that as well. So clicking over here in our element, it's got that color. And so back over in our integrated preview, let's give ourselves some more space again. We're going to select hyperlinks. And I do typically try to alphabetize my selectors here. We're going to set the color, put a pound sign in, and paste that color value. And then we should see those hyperlinks change. So finishing out my alphabetizing, I'm just going to move body up here as well. And then in our mockup, the hyperlinks also do not have the underline on them. So that is the text decoration setting to none. All right, so you can see how we've started to match what's going on in our body copy. All right, let's talk now about some of the headings. Let's take this very top heading as our next example, where we need to go over to Figma and figure out what that is. So first of all, it's this nice fuchsia type color. So that's going to be our H1 in our document. So we will select, we will select H1s and set color to that value. See that color change. All right, now it is the bold italic. And so we're going to set font style to italic. And the font weight, we need to match the bold weight from the Google Fonts API, which is 700. So we need a value of 700 there. Okay, so there you can see the font style change to be italic, and it's colored the right way, and it's matching the all the other settings there. What is not yet matching is the spacing below this paragraph, and actually the spacing above it as well. It's actually not a paragraph, is it? It's a, a heading. So if we move over here, we can see we can click on the element in Figma and hold the Alt or Option key and then hover over other elements like the canvas as a whole. You can see that it is 83 pixels pushed down from the top, and there are 18 pixels between it and the next block. Okay, so we can match those settings with margin top. 83 is 8.3 rem, and margin bottom. And that was 18 pixels. Okay, last of all, it has its own font size and line height. So the font size is 37 and line height of 4.8. So we're going to say font size 3.7 rem and line height. What was it again? It was 4.8. Okay, very good. So now you can see we are making this match much closer. Again, let's pop out into that separate preview so we can hold it beside our mockup. And if we align the tops of the pages together, we should see that it is exactly the same amount of space set down, and we've got the next block pushed down about the same amount of space as well. Okay, let's start working down and take a look at that next block. Notice that this paragraph is set as a different size from the rest of the elements in the page. So this is an opportunity to switch away from using tag selectors and select this particular paragraph based on the class that we have available. So the class of lead will allow us to select this. So we need the class of lead. Okay, and he's going to be 19 pixels over 36. So font size 1.9 rem, line height 3.6 rem. Okay, I saw he got larger there and he's looking good. Let's check on the space below. It's 14 pixels. Okay, so let's go margin bottom 1.4 rem. Okay, so looking at our integrated preview, that's looking pretty good. If we want to hold it up next to our full window preview, we just need to refresh this page to make sure we have the latest styles that we've set and hold it side by side, and that is looking really good. Let's just make it narrow enough so that we can see the line repeating and we can continue to validate that we're in good shape. Okay, so we would continue this process down for each of the elements. We need to make sure that the list items get the right styles, the H2s get the right styles with the appropriate spacing above and below, and there's even H3s in this document as well that we need to make sure to match. So don't overlook the fact that we have two different sizes and hierarchies here. Okay, so that is the gist, and you can now carry forward to complete the same idea for this. And as you continue this exercise, the second part where, don't forget, you need to bring in the new fonts from Google Fonts API, and you need to set up in that file the font size at 10 pixels on HTML so that your scaling works as expected. And you should validate all of that by checking it in the browser and holding it next to the mockup like this to ensure that you are matching things as closely as you possibly can. All right, good luck.